Welcome back to our channel, Shattered Trust Stories, where we explore the untold stories of relationships, heartbreaks, and the unexpected twists of life. Let's get started. At the beginning, everything in my life seemed perfect. I had a beautiful wife, Sarah, a son who was making us proud, and a life that many would envy. We had been married for years, and while there had been some tension in our relationship over time, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I trusted my wife, trusted her completely, and believed we had built a solid foundation together. Stephen had always been part of our lives. He was a family friend who we had known for years. He was charming, successful, and someone we trusted with our deepest secrets. I saw him as a good man, a reliable figure who could be counted on during tough times. He was always there, whether it was to help with home repairs or to join us at family dinners, but everything changed when I began to notice subtle shifts in Sarah's behavior. It wasn't anything major at first: a late night at work, a few extra hours on her phone, moments when she would act distracted or distant. I didn't think much of it at the time, but my gut told me something was off. It wasn't until one evening, when Sarah left the house on yet another girls' night out, that I decided to investigate. The nagging feeling grew stronger, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that something wasn't right. That I went through her phone, and that's when I found it: texts, pictures, and messages between her and Stephen. The affair had been going on for months. The trust one had in her shattered in an instant. My whole world seemed to collapse, and I was left struggling to come to terms with the betrayal. That I didn't confront Sarah right away. Instead, I took time to plan my next move. I knew that if I was going to expose this betrayal, it had to be done carefully. I needed evidence, and I needed to be sure that Stephen would pay the price for what he had done to me, to my family. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The day of my son's wedding should have been one of the happiest days of my life. My son, the product of years of love and care, was about to marry the woman he loved. As a father, there was a certain joy in knowing that he had found his life partner, someone who made him happy. And yet, despite this joyful occasion, I felt a gnawing emptiness in my chest. The weight of Sarah's betrayal hung over me like a dark cloud, making everything feel surreal. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful, emotional, even. There were tears, laughter, vows exchanged, and promises made. My son and his bride looked radiant, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating a new chapter in their lives. I tried to focus on the happiness of the moment, trying to be present for my son, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the evening drew on, the reception was in full swing. The guests were mingling, and the mood was festive. My son and his new wife danced together, sharing their first moments as a married couple. But amidst the celebration, I couldn't ignore Sarah and Stephen. They were standing together at the edge of the room, laughing as if there was nothing to worry about. Their casual closeness, the way they exchanged looks and whispered to each other, was almost unbearable. It was as if they were mocking me, knowing that I was watching. And that's when it happened. Stephen, with his usual charm and confidence, stood up to make a toast. Everyone grew silent as he raised his glass, and for a moment, I thought it would be a respectful moment for the newlyweds. But instead, Stephen's words were sharp, cruel, and meant to humiliate me. "Here's to the happy couple," Stephen began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "May your marriage be as strong and successful as the one some of us used to have." Before things got complicated. The laughter that followed from a few of the guests stung like daggers. I felt my blood boil. My face flushed with anger and humiliation. The joke was so clearly aimed at me. The entire room was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. I could feel my heart racing, and a pit formed in my stomach. Sarah, standing next to Stephen, let out a nervous laugh, trying to play it off, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. The public humiliation was unbearable. This man, who I had once trusted, was mocking my family, mocking me in front of everyone who mattered. It was a slap in the face, and I knew then that the time for passive acceptance had ended. This wasn't just an affair anymore, it was an attack on my dignity, on everything I had built. And I couldn't allow that to go unpunished. That I stood up from my seat. The room fell silent, and all eyes were on me now. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to expose everything in that moment. But I had to stay calm. I had to plan my next move carefully. Reacting in anger would only give Stephen the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. No, I would take my revenge, but I would do it on my terms. That I left the reception without a word to anyone. The evening felt like a blur, a strange dream that I couldn't wake up from. As I walked out into the cool night air, I could hear the laughter from the party behind me. But all I could think about was the next step. I knew, in that moment, that I had to make Stephen and Sarah pay. This humiliation would not stand. Back at home, I sat in my study, the silence suffocating. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had just happened. I thought about the years I had spent with Sarah, how we had built our lives together, only for her to destroy it with her affair. I thought about Stephen, how he had wormed his way into our lives and betrayed me at every turn. I felt a sense of rage that I hadn't experienced before. But alongside the anger, there was something else, a cold, calculating determination. I wasn't going to let this stand. I wasn't going to let them ruin me. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts and planning my revenge. The wedding had been the tipping point, but now I was going to take action. I wasn't just going to expose their affair, I was going to ruin them. I would use everything at my disposal, Stephen's own secrets, his financial records, and the technology that had become so accessible in the digital age. If he thought he could destroy me with his cruel joke, he had another thing coming. But first, I needed more evidence. I needed to dig deeper. I began looking into Stephen's life beyond his relationship with Sarah. I discovered that Stephen had been a trusted family friend, but it was clear that he had ulterior motives. He was hiding a dark side, one that I could use to destroy him. The deeper I dug into Stephen's life, the more I realized that this wasn't just about an affair. Stephen had a history of deceit. He had used his position of trust to manipulate and harm others. The financial records I uncovered revealed a shocking truth. Stephen had been involved in several illegal activities, including embezzling money from his company, stealing funds from various investors, and covering his tracks with a series of well-placed lies. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. Stephen had been betraying everyone around him, all while pretending to be a good friend and trusted professional. As I pieced the puzzle together, I knew that I had something far more powerful than just the affair to use against him. This wasn't just about getting even, it was about justice. Stephen had harmed too many people, and it was time for him to face the consequences. I felt a strange sense of calm as I began to formulate my plan. The revenge would be calculated and precise. No one would be able to deny the truth when I exposed him. It wasn't just about hurting him, it was about making sure he could never hurt anyone again. After the wedding fiasco, my resolve had hardened. The pain of what happened lingered, but it was no longer an emotional wound. Now, it was a fire, burning, determined, and focused. I needed to gather the evidence that would expose Stephen for who he truly was. I had felt powerless in the past, but now, the world was in my hands. I could control this situation. I would decide how Stephen's life would play out from this point on. The first step was to go back to the beginning, the moment I first met Stephen. We had been friends for years. He had always been the type of guy who was charming, well-spoken, and friendly to everyone. I never questioned his sincerity because he knew exactly how to mask his true intentions. Our families had spent countless weekends together. I had trusted him. I had confided in him. And now, I realized how foolish I had been. The pain of that realization stung, but I couldn't let it cloud my judgment. I needed to think clearly, stay composed. If I let my emotions dictate my actions, would lose control. My first plan was to focus on Stephen's professional life. The financial records I had gathered were crucial. They painted a picture of a man who had hidden his tracks too well, but his greed had left behind a trail. My background in business gave me an edge. I knew how to sift through financial documents, how to find discrepancies that would have otherwise gone unnoticed by the untrained eye. I started by examining his business dealings, his investments, his partnerships, the way he moved money. The more I dug, the more I found. There were numerous instances where Stephen had misappropriated funds, stealing from clients, manipulating contracts to line his own pockets, and even falsifying records to cover up his tracks. It was clear that he had been living a double life, the family man who appeared trustworthy, and the businessman who was willing to betray anyone for a quick gain. But these records weren't just damning, they were the key to breaking him. I began documenting everything. Each piece of evidence, every irregularity, every lie. I saved copies of every document, screenshotting emails, recording conversations, and ensuring that there was no way Stephen could deny what he had done. If he thought he could escape the truth, he was sorely mistaken. I was methodical. I had learned long ago that the key to winning a battle like this was in the details. I would not leave a single stone unturned. Next, I decided to confront the people who had been involved with Stephen, those who might know more about his dealings. I started with his closest business associates, friends, and employees. Some were easy to talk to. They didn't hesitate to spill their secrets, knowing they would never have to face the consequences. Others were more reluctant, but I knew how to push the right buttons to get what I needed. One by one, they confirmed my suspicions. They spoke of his shady business practices, his manipulation of finances, and his unethical behavior. Each conversation felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As I pieced together his criminal activities, I realized that this was bigger than I had originally thought. Stephen wasn't just an adulterer. He was a criminal who had used his position as a trusted family friend to exploit others. I felt a sense of satisfaction in my growing knowledge. I could already see the collapse of his world in my mind's eye. It was only a matter of time before I would expose him for all that he was. But there was still one crucial step left, the final piece of evidence that would tie everything together. I had to get access to his personal life. Stephen's affair with Sarah had been public knowledge in my house, but I needed to confirm it in a way that would leave no room for denial. I started by looking into his personal finances, his emails, his phone records. I had my suspicions that he had been hiding more than just a romantic relationship with Sarah. I suspected that there were other secrets, ones that might be even more damaging to him. I hired a private investigator who had experience with situations like this. He was discreet, methodical, and unrelenting. Over the next few days, he uncovered shocking details. Stephen had been living two lives, one as the charming, successful doctor and family friend, and another as someone completely different, someone who had been involved in blackmail and extortion. The investigator had uncovered records of phone calls with shady figures, exchanges of money, and blackmail material that Stephen had been using to manipulate others. My anger simmered as I reviewed everything the investigator had gathered. This was it. This was the final confirmation I needed to take Stephen down once and for all. He had played with my life for too long. But it wasn't just my life that he had ruined. It was my family's, and the lives of countless others who had trusted him. I had everything now, proof of his infidelity, his financial crimes, his manipulation, and his history of unethical behavior. The next step was clear. I would expose him publicly. I wouldn't just ruin his reputation. I would destroy his life, as he had tried to destroy mine. He thought he had power. But he didn't know what it meant to face someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. At this point, I was done being passive. I had been hurt, humiliated, and betrayed, but I was going to make sure that Stephen felt the consequences of his actions. He would regret the day he ever thought he could get away with it. This was no longer about revenge, it was about justice. The plan was set. Now all I had to do was execute it. After days of careful planning, meticulous gathering of evidence, and organizing the final blow to Stephen and Sarah, I knew it was time to execute my revenge. But something inside me told me that simply exposing Stephen's criminal activities wasn't enough. It would hurt him, of course, but it wouldn't truly break him in the way he deserved. I needed something more dramatic. Something that would completely unravel his carefully constructed life and show him the consequences of his betrayal. That I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to humiliate him. Publicly. I wanted to expose the dark underbelly of his world in front of everyone he had ever fooled. That meant using technology in a way he never expected. The deepfake technology, something that had been making headlines for its ability to create realistic, fake videos, was the perfect tool. Deepfakes were dangerous, controversial, and incredibly powerful. They had the potential to manipulate perceptions, create lies, and destroy reputations in an instant. It was risky, yes, but I was at a point where there was no turning back. My anger had reached a boiling point, and now I had to make sure that Stephen felt every ounce of it. He had humiliated me at my son's wedding. Now, it was his turn. That I spent hours researching deepfake technology, learning the ins and outs, understanding how it worked, and how I could use it to expose Stephen for what he was. I wasn't going to just create any video. I wanted something that would capture the essence of his darkest secrets, something that would be undeniable and shocking. That I spent the following week gathering everything I needed. The investigator had provided me with enough material to work with, but I needed more. I needed a private conversation between Stephen and someone who could corroborate the worst parts of his hidden life. And that's when the breakthrough came. I discovered that Stephen had secretly recorded a conversation with one of his criminal associates, a conversation that detailed his illegal activities, his manipulation of clients, and even his blackmail schemes. The audio was perfect. It had everything I needed to create the damning video. Using the audio, I meticulously crafted a deepfake video that seemed completely real. I made sure that Stephen's face and voice were flawlessly replicated. I then layered in footage of him in various compromising situations, moments where he had been caught on camera acting arrogantly, with a smug smile, as if he was invincible. The video I created showed him not just as an adulterer, but as a man who had been involved in organized crime, using his position to extort money from clients, threaten their families, and destroy anyone who got in his way. I made sure the video was convincing, knowing that once it was out, there would be no way for Stephen to deny it. That I also knew that this video could go viral in an instant. It wasn't just a revenge tactic, it was the perfect storm of humiliation, betrayal, and technological manipulation. If I was going to make him suffer the way he had made me suffer, this video would be the ultimate weapon. But I wasn't done yet. I still needed to make sure that Stephen couldn't hide from the truth. I contacted a few trusted friends in the media who would be able to help me get the video into the right hands. This wasn't just about me, it was about making sure the world knew what kind of man Stephen truly was. I couldn't just let him walk away from this. The video needed to be released in a way that would leave him with no escape, no way to spin the story. The day I released the video, I watched as it exploded across social media, the news, and online forums. It spread like wildfire, drawing attention from every corner. The reactions were immediate and brutal. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. This man, this seemingly respectable doctor, had been living a double life as a criminal mastermind, extorting people, threatening them, and ruining lives with his deceitful ways. Stephen's response was predictable: denial. But it was too late for him. The damage was already done. People were already talking. His clients, his colleagues, and even his friends began to distance themselves from him. The media had a field day, digging into his past, unearthing every shady deal he had ever made, every lie he had ever told. His reputation was destroyed in a matter of hours. The very public persona he had carefully built over the years collapsed under the weight of his own actions, but the real blow came when law enforcement got involved. The video, with all the incriminating evidence, was enough to open an investigation into Stephen's criminal activities. Authorities began tracking down the individuals involved in his schemes, piecing together the network of corruption he had built. It wasn't long before they made their move. Stephen was arrested for his involvement in the illegal operations he had been running, and he was charged with multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and money laundering. The media frenzy surrounding his arrest was intense. It was clear that this man, who had once been a trusted family friend, was nothing more than a criminal in disguise. His arrest marked the end of his reign of deception, and the beginning of a long road to justice for all the people he had hurt, including me. But what about Sarah? She, too, had been a willing participant in Stephen's schemes. She had been a silent accomplice in the affair, pretending to be the supportive wife while sleeping with another man, and had knowingly continued to deceive me. But as Stephen's world collapsed, so did hers. It didn't take long for people to start asking questions about her role in the affair and the fallout from the scandal. Sarah was left with nothing. Her reputation, too, was shattered. No one wanted to associate with the woman who had so openly humiliated her husband and betrayed her family. She was ostracized from her social circle and was left to confront the consequences of her actions. As for me, the satisfaction of exposing Stephen for the man he truly was didn't come with joy, but with a strange sense of closure. The revenge I had sought was complete, and I had not only destroyed the lives of those who had wronged me, but I had also reclaimed my dignity and self-respect. I had taken back control of my life, but I didn't stop there. I knew that the next step was to rebuild my own life. I had been torn apart by betrayal, but now, with Stephen and Sarah out of the picture, I had the opportunity to start over. And I wasn't going to let their actions define me any longer. With Stephen arrested and the media relentlessly tearing apart his life, a sense of justice settled over me. But I knew the war wasn't truly over. There was still one last step, one final confrontation that would complete my revenge. Stephen was behind bars, but Sarah was still free. The truth was out, the evidence was overwhelming, but I couldn't let it go until I had a chance to face her, until I could look her in the eyes and force her to confront what she had done. That I hadn't spoken to Sarah since the wedding. In the immediate aftermath, she had tried to reach out, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. But how could I forgive someone who had so casually destroyed everything we had built? She had humiliated me, lied to me, and worse, she had been complicit in Stephen's schemes for years. The woman I thought I knew was nothing more than a stranger, someone who had never cared for me or our family the way I had believed. That I had been thinking about this moment for weeks, knowing that it would eventually come. I could have just walked away, let her face the consequences of her actions without my involvement, but I wanted more. I wanted her to understand the pain she had caused. I needed her to feel the weight of the betrayal. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about closure. The confrontation took place in a small cafe, one that I knew Sarah frequented. I had arranged everything carefully, making sure the setting would be intimate, private, and free from distractions. I didn't want any interruptions when I laid it all out for her. I had already heard from mutual friends how her life had unraveled since Stephen's arrest. Her social circle had abandoned her, and even the family who had once supported her now viewed her with contempt. The walls were closing in, but she hadn't yet fully realized how deeply she had fallen. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted her immediately. She looked different, worn down, as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up to her. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. She was no longer the woman who had once carried herself with such grace and poise. Now, she looked fragile, defeated. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. But then I remembered everything she had done, everything she had taken from me, and that pity turned into rage once again. She looked up when she saw me approach, and I could see the fear flash in her eyes. She had to know this moment was coming. She had to understand that she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions forever. Her face flushed, and she quickly tried to gather herself, putting on a smile that barely masked the anxiety she was feeling. "Michael," she said, her voice faltering. "I didn't expect to see you here." I sat down across from her, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the small cafe. I could feel the tension building. She was nervous, and I knew it. She had every reason to be. "I'm sure you didn't," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "But here we are." Sarah reached for her coffee, but her hands were shaking. She took a long sip, then placed the cup back down with a sigh. "I know I've messed up. I know what happened was horrible. But I'm sorry, Michael. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words felt hollow to me. How many times had I heard her say something similar over the years? How many times had she told me she loved me, that we were a family, only to turn around and betray that very love? Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't undo the years of lies, the affair, and the destruction of our family. Sorry wouldn't make up for the fact that my world had been turned upside down by the very person I trusted the most. "No," I said firmly, "you're not sorry. If you were, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. You wouldn't have slept with Stephen. You wouldn't have destroyed everything we had. You wouldn't have torn apart our family just because you thought you could get away with it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. The time for her to cry had passed. The time for excuses was over. "I loved you, Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I don't know what went wrong. I don't know what happened." "You don't know?" I repeated, my anger rising again. "You didn't know? You didn't know that destroying our family, betraying me, and destroying everything we built would have consequences? You didn't know that?" I could see the guilt in her eyes now, the realization that she was facing the full weight of her actions. It was too late for her to pretend. Too late for her to act like this was just a mistake. "You had a choice, Sarah." "We all have choices," I said, my voice cold and calculated. "And you chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to tear everything apart. Now you'll live with the consequences of those choices." Sarah's eyes darted to the floor, her face flushed with shame. She could no longer look me in the eye. She had no defense, no argument. "Everything I had said was true. I never wanted to hurt you," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, you did," I said, standing up. I couldn't sit there and listen to her anymore. I had heard enough. "You hurt me, Sarah. And now, it's over." I walked away without looking back, leaving her to face the consequences of her betrayal. The weight of what had just happened settled on my shoulders, but it wasn't the same burden it had been before. I had said everything I needed to say. I had confronted her with the truth. And now, I was done. The days following the confrontation with Sarah were a whirlwind. My emotions were still raw, but a sense of calm began to settle in. I had said everything I needed to say. The anger that had consumed me for so long was starting to dissipate, and though the hurt was still there, I felt more in control than I ever had before, but the real consequences of Sarah's betrayal had yet to fully unfold. While she was no longer a part of my life, the public exposure of her affair and Stephen's arrest had cast a long shadow over everything. The media had gotten wind of the story, and suddenly, my family's pain was no longer a private matter. The world knew about our personal struggles, and though I wanted to protect my son and shield him from the fallout, there was no escaping the truth. Sarah, who had once been the center of our social circles, became a pariah. Friends who had once showered her with affection now turned their backs. The woman who had been so admired in the community was now seen as nothing more than a cheater, a liar. And Stephen, well, he was behind bars, his reputation shattered, his career destroyed. But for some reason, I still didn't feel fully satisfied. Yes, the man who had taken everything from me was in prison. Yes, Sarah's life had unraveled in front of her. But there was something about the whole situation that still gnawed at me. There were more pieces to this puzzle, more layers of deceit and manipulation that hadn't fully been uncovered. I couldn't stop until I knew the entire truth. I turned to the remaining evidence I had gathered, the financial records, the emails, the text messages. There were more threads to pull, more lies to expose. I wanted the world to know exactly who Stephen was, not just as my wife's lover, but as the person who had carefully built a life of lies. The more I uncovered, the darker the story became. Sarah's affair with Stephen wasn't just a random act of infidelity. It wasn't just a mistake. The more I dug, the more I realized that this was part of a much larger web of manipulation and deceit. Stephen had been a trusted family friend, an integral part of our social circle, our lives, and most importantly, our business. His influence went beyond our family. He had built a network of connections, manipulating people behind the scenes for years. He was a master of deception, always wearing the mask of the charming, trustworthy man while hiding his true nature. But what infuriated me most was how he had used his position to prey on vulnerable people. I had trusted him with my family. I had trusted him with everything. And he had betrayed that trust to the core. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that I wasn't just seeking revenge against a man who had destroyed my marriage. I was uncovering a much larger, more insidious conspiracy. Stephen wasn't just an unfaithful lover, he was a predator, using his charm and influence to manipulate and deceive people for his own benefit. This wasn't just about him and Sarah, it was about everything he had done to our entire community, the people he had taken advantage of, and the lives he had destroyed. And so, I began to plan my next move, not just to punish Stephen, but to expose everything he had done. This was no longer just a personal vendetta. This was about righting the wrongs that had been committed, about making sure that everyone knew the truth. The public exposure of Sarah and Stephen's affair had been just the beginning. What came next would be even more devastating. I was going to take down the entire network Stephen had built. I was going to make sure that everyone knew exactly who he was and what he had done, but I had to be careful. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure the truth came to light without causing more harm than necessary. My son, my family, they had already been through so much. I had to make sure they weren't dragged into the chaos that was about to unfold. As the days passed, I carefully planned my next steps. The media was already covering Stephen's arrest, but the full extent of his actions hadn't been revealed yet. I began to contact the people Stephen had manipulated over the years, his former colleagues, business associates, and even some of his past lovers. I knew that there were more people out there who had been hurt by him, people who had stayed silent for far too long. It was time for them to speak out, and so, I began to gather my army. With the help of a few trusted allies, I started to spread the word. Stephen's carefully crafted image of the perfect family man was about to be shattered once and for all. The truth was about to come crashing down. Meanwhile, Sarah's life continued to unravel. The shame she had felt after our confrontation had only deepened as the public learned about her affair. She tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, but it was too late. Her friends were gone. The community she had once been a part of had turned its back on her. And now, her husband, the man she had so easily betrayed, was not going to let her escape the consequences. I had already made my decision. I wasn't just going to expose Stephen's crimes, I was going to make sure that Sarah paid for her role in everything that had happened. She was not innocent. She had chosen to betray me, to destroy our family. And now, she would face the consequences of those actions. The fallout from the public exposure was nothing short of catastrophic. People in the community began talking, and before long, everyone knew the truth. What started as a private betrayal had turned into a public spectacle. But in the midst of all this chaos, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The world had seen the truth. Stephen and Sarah had been exposed for who they truly were. In the end, I had gotten what I wanted: justice. The ultimate revenge. It wasn't about destroying people or making them suffer, it was about making sure the truth came to light, about ensuring that the ones who had betrayed me, and countless others, would never get away with it. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived. After weeks of gathering evidence, contacting victims of Stephen's manipulation, and slowly unraveling the web of lies he had carefully spun over the years, I was ready. The truth was about to come crashing down, not just for Stephen, but for everyone who had been complicit in his lies, including Sarah. I had always thought I knew what I was capable of. I had never imagined that I would be in a situation like this, one where I had to plan such a precise and calculated course of action to expose a family friend, destroy a marriage, and take down a man who had carefully built his entire life on deceit. But as I sat down, alone in the silence of my home, I realized that this was more than just revenge. It was about justice. I had made my choice. This wasn't about hate, although I felt every ounce of anger and betrayal inside of me. This was about showing the world the man Stephen truly was, and making sure he never hurt anyone again. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and with it, the last pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I'd spent weeks orchestrating the perfect moment to expose Stephen in front of everyone. He was a respected doctor, a man who had carefully crafted an image of trustworthiness and moral integrity. But no one knew the darkness that lay beneath the surface. No one knew the countless lives he had ruined over the years, nor the emotional destruction he had caused in my family. The time had come to expose him to the world. I had arranged for a press conference to be held at the local news station, and invited a select group of people, those who had been directly affected by Stephen's actions. There, we would finally reveal the full extent of his crimes. It was going to be public, messy, and devastating. But it was the only way to make sure that Stephen was held accountable for everything he had done. When Stephen arrived at the press conference, he was completely unaware of what was about to happen. He had been told that the media wanted to cover his medical work, and he was eager to bask in the glory of his carefully curated public persona. What he didn't know was that I had arranged for the truth to be revealed in front of a live audience. As he stood there, adjusting his suit and preparing for the interview, I could see the confidence in his demeanor. He had no idea that the foundation of his life was about to be pulled out from under him. His smile was wide and self-assured, but it faltered as he saw me step forward, a folder in hand. The room fell silent. "I think it's time we finally talk about your real work, Stephen," I said, my voice steady and calm, despite the fury boiling inside me. The room went quiet, and all eyes turned to me as I opened the folder and began to pull out the documents. What followed was the most intense moment of my life. The documents I had meticulously gathered, financial records, emails, text messages, and photos, painted a damning picture of Stephen's betrayal. It wasn't just the affair with Sarah. It was his involvement in countless other unethical practices, all hidden beneath the veneer of respectability. I didn't stop there. I revealed the recordings I had made, the conversations he had had with patients, colleagues, and even others who had once trusted him. The web of lies he had spun was unraveling, piece by piece. For the first time, Stephen's face showed something that resembled fear. He tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. There was no escaping the truth anymore. The audience watched in stunned silence as the man they had all admired for years was reduced to nothing more than a liar and a criminal. But the most shocking revelation came next. I had also been in contact with the authorities, and as the press conference continued, they were already moving in. Stephen was arrested right there, in front of everyone, on charges of fraud, malpractice, and several counts of emotional abuse. His career, his freedom, and his reputation, all of it was over, but there was still one more person who needed to be held accountable. Sarah. The woman I had once loved, who had betrayed me so completely. Watching her stand there, helpless and broken, I could feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. She had tried to fight back, tried to salvage whatever dignity she could, but it was too late. Her affair had not only destroyed our marriage, it had exposed her to the world for the manipulator she had become. With Stephen's arrest, Sarah's world crumbled as well. She lost her job, her friends, her reputation. There was no one left to defend her, no one who would stand by her side. She was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. What I had never expected, though, was the overwhelming sense of closure I would feel in that moment. It wasn't a victory, per se. It wasn't the satisfaction of seeing them suffer. It was the understanding that I had taken control of my life again. I had risen from the ashes of my broken marriage, from the humiliation of betrayal, and I had made sure that the people who had hurt me and my family would never be able to hurt anyone else. Stephen and Sarah's lives were ruined, but my son and I could begin to rebuild ours. The damage had been done, but I had learned a valuable lesson along the way. Trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired, but it can lead you to find your strength. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. It was about making sure that those who hurt others for selfish gain were held accountable. And though the road ahead would be long and painful, I knew I had done what I needed to do.